Long before the name Genghis Khan echoed across continents, before kings trembled at the sight of Mongol horsemen appearing on the horizon, and before the largest contiguous land empire in human history emerged from the grasslands of Central Asia, there was only an endless sea of wind and grass. Across the vast Mongolian steppe, the landscape seemed almost without end. Rolling plains stretched beyond the horizon. Mountains rose in the distance. Rivers carved narrow paths through the wilderness. The seasons ruled every aspect of life. The summer brought rich grazing lands. The winter brought bitter cold that could wipe out entire herds. To survive in such an unforgiving world required strength, adaptability, and constant vigilance. This was not a place where walls protected people. This was not a place where cities offered safety. Everything depended upon movement. Everything depended upon horses. Everything depended upon loyalty. During the middle of the 12th century, the steppe was divided among dozens of tribes and clans. Each possessed its own traditions. Each defended its own grazing lands. Each sought advantage over its rivals. The names of these tribes would later become famous throughout history. The Karates, the Naimans, the Tatars, the Merkits, the Tayikiad, the Mongols. Yet despite sharing similar ways of life, they were rarely united. Old feuds passed from one generation to another. Blood debts lasted decades. A raid carried out by one clan demanded revenge from another. That revenge created another grievance. The cycle rarely ended. No single ruler controlled the entire steppe. Power rested with tribal chiefs who had to earn loyalty every single day. A leader who could not provide food, protection, or victory quickly lost followers. Men simply left with their families and livestock to join someone stronger. Authority was never guaranteed. It had to be constantly defended. Unlike many kingdoms farther south, there were no permanent capitals. There were no marble palaces. There were no elaborate bureaucracies. A ruler's wealth moved with him. Entire communities packed their homes into carts pulled by oxen. Large felt tents known today as yurts could be dismantled in hours. Families followed fresh pastures wherever the seasons demanded. Mobility was not merely convenient. It was essential. Children learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk. A horse was more than transportation. It was survival. It provided speed. It provided milk. It carried supplies. It offered an advantage in hunting and warfare that few settled civilizations could truly understand. By adulthood, nearly every man on the steppe had become an accomplished horseman. Many could loose arrows accurately while riding at full speed. They hunted wolves. They tracked deer. They endured storms that would have overwhelmed armies raised in more comfortable lands. Life itself became preparation for war. To outsiders, the steppe often appeared empty. Travelers crossing its endless grasslands saw little besides distant camps and grazing animals. Yet beneath that apparent emptiness existed an intricate political world. Marriage alliances shaped diplomacy. Personal friendships could alter the balance of power. Ancient rivalries determined whether tribes traded peacefully or met each other in battle. Honor carried immense weight. So did reputation. A leader remembered for generosity attracted followers. A leader known for weakness quickly found himself abandoned. Religion reflected the natural world surrounding these nomads. Many practiced forms of shamanism centered upon spirits, ancestors, and the eternal blue sky. Above everything stood Tingri, the eternal heaven, the supreme force believed to guide destiny. Victory in battle, the rise of rulers, the fall of kingdoms. Many believed all unfolded beneath Tungri's will. This belief would later become deeply connected with the authority claimed by Genghis Khan himself. Women also held important responsibilities. While the men often rode to war or hunted across the plains, women managed households, supervised livestock, organized camps, and maintained the daily life that allowed the tribes to survive. Some advised powerful leaders. Others handled negotiations. Their influence was often greater than many neighboring civilizations expected. Far to the south, powerful dynasties watched these nomads with caution. The Jin dynasty ruled northern China. The Tangut kingdom, known as Western Xia, controlled valuable territory to the northwest. These settled states viewed the steppe as both threat and opportunity. Sometimes they traded silk, grain, and luxury goods with tribal leaders. Sometimes they recruited steppe warriors as allies. Sometimes they deliberately encouraged conflict between rival tribes. Dividing the nomads prevented any single leader from becoming powerful enough to threaten China's northern frontier. For generations, this strategy worked. Whenever one tribe grew stronger, another received gifts or military support. Balance replaced unity. Conflict replaced cooperation. Among the tribes favored at various times by the Jin dynasty were the Tatars. This relationship deepened resentment across the steppe. Many Mongol families blamed both the Tatars and the Jin court for years of suffering. Those memories would not be forgotten. They would eventually fuel one of history's greatest campaigns of revenge. Within this fractured world lived one relatively modest clan known as the Borjigin. Though respected for noble ancestry, they possessed little real political influence. Their fortunes depended upon the leadership of a chieftain named Yasuji. He was neither emperor nor king. He commanded only a limited following. Yet he understood the fragile art of steppe politics. He formed alliances where possible. He defended his people whenever necessary. Among his closest relationships stood Togrul, leader of the powerful Karait tribe. That friendship would later shape the destiny of Yasuji's young son. Yasuji's wife was Holan. Her own story reflected the harsh customs of the age. Years earlier, she had been taken by Yasuji during a raid while traveling with another man. Such abductions, though brutal, were not uncommon across the steppe. Marriage often followed conquest rather than courtship. Out of this union came several children. One of them would forever alter world history. Around the year 1162, although historians continued debating the precise date, Holan gave birth near the Onan River. According to later tradition, the newborn arrived to many Mongols. This unusual sign suggested a child destined for greatness. Whether the story reflected genuine memory or a later legend remains impossible to know. What is certain is that the boy entered a world defined by uncertainty. He received the name Temüjin. The reason behind that name has fascinated historians for centuries. One tradition claims that Yasuji had recently captured a Tatar warrior bearing the same name. Naming his son after a defeated enemy may have symbolized triumph. Others believe the name carried associations with iron and strength. Either way, the child called Temüjin began life with no indication that he would one day become master of much of Eurasia. His earliest years resembled those of countless other children growing up on the steppe. He learned to ride. He observed hunting expeditions. He watched adults negotiate alliances around evening fires. He absorbed the unwritten rules governing loyalty, hospitality, and revenge. Even childhood involved responsibility. Every family member contributed to survival. Livestock required constant care. Food had to be gathered. Danger always remained close. Predators threatened herds. Enemy raiders could appear without warning. Nature itself demanded endurance. Temüjin's father sought to strengthen the family's position through marriage diplomacy. When the boy reached roughly 9 years of age, Yasujii arranged his betrothal to a girl named Borte from the influential Ongjarat tribe. Such marriages were political agreements before they became personal relationships. The alliance promised mutual support between families. Following custom, Temüjin remained with Borte's relatives while his father began the journey home. He never completed it. Along the way, Yasujii encountered Tatars. They recognized him. Old enemies rarely forgot familiar faces. Feigning hospitality, they invited him to share food. Instead, they secretly poisoned him. The toxin worked slowly. Yasujii managed to reach his own camp before dying. His death shattered everything. The consequences reached far beyond personal grief. Without a strong adult leader, his family immediately lost protection. The followers who had once acknowledged Yasujii abandoned his widow and children. Rather than supporting young Temüjin as successor, rival clans rejected the family completely. Holun suddenly found herself alone. She faced the impossible task of raising several children without powerful allies, sufficient livestock, or tribal backing. For many families, such abandonment meant death. The steppe showed little mercy to the vulnerable. Yet Holun refused to surrender. Gathering her children together, she led them into isolation. They survived by fishing rivers. They collected edible roots. They hunted small animals. They searched endlessly for anything capable of sustaining life. The family experienced hunger almost constantly. Winter became especially cruel. Food disappeared. Animals died. Every day demanded new resourcefulness. Temüjin grew up understanding deprivation in ways few future conquerors ever would. He knew what it meant to watch stronger people turn away. He knew what it meant to rely entirely upon family. These experiences would shape nearly every decision he later made as ruler. Loyalty became priceless because betrayal had nearly destroyed him. Merit mattered because inherited status had failed his family when they needed it most. Hardship also revealed tensions within the household itself. Resources remained scarce. Authority became contested. Temüjin's older half-brother Begtur attempted to assert dominance over the family. The disagreement escalated beyond argument. Together with his full brother Khazar, Temüjin confronted Begtur. The encounter ended in violence. Begtur was killed. From a modern perspective, the act appears shocking. Within the brutal realities of the steppe, however, control over food and leadership often became matters of survival. The incident revealed something significant about Temüjin's developing character. He would not quietly accept another person's authority if he believed it threatened his family's future. Years later, he would display the same determination on a vastly larger stage. Despite overwhelming hardship, Temüjin slowly built friendships outside his immediate family. These relationships became some of the most important of his life. One young man named Boworshu joined him after helping recover stolen horses. Another named Jelm would later prove equally devoted. Neither belonged to Temüjin's closest blood relatives. Both earned trust through action. This pattern became central to Temüjin's leadership. He increasingly valued demonstrated loyalty above noble ancestry. In a society obsessed with lineage, that idea represented a quiet revolution. Not everyone accepted his growing influence. The Teyiqid, rivals connected to older political disputes, eventually captured him. They placed a heavy wooden cane around his neck to prevent escape. The device restricted movement and symbolized complete humiliation. For many prisoners, such captivity ended in slavery or death. Temüjin refused to surrender hope. One night he escaped. Accounts preserved in the secret history of the Mongols describe how a sympathetic guard named Western Xia and his family concealed the fugitive despite enormous personal risk. Whether every detail can be verified remains uncertain. What matters historically is the broader pattern. Again and again, individuals chose to help Temüjin despite the danger. Something about his personality inspired extraordinary loyalty. He remembered those acts throughout his life. Years later, many families who aided him during obscurity received positions of honor after his rise to power. Unlike rulers who forgot early supporters, Temüjin built his future upon remembered loyalty. As adolescence gave way to adulthood, he returned to claim Borte as his wife. Their marriage fulfilled the agreement arranged years earlier by Yasujii. For Temüjin, Borte became far more than a political partner. Throughout his rise, she remained one of his closest advisors and most trusted companions. The alliance with her family strengthened his fragile position. Yet happiness remained brief. Old enemies still watched. The Merkit tribe carried a long memory. Years before, Yasujii had abducted Holan from one of their men. Now, they sought revenge through the next generation. Without warning, Merkit warriors attacked Temüjin's camp. The assault scattered his followers. Borte was captured and carried away. For Temüjin, the loss reached beyond personal heartbreak. It threatened everything. His political alliance with the Anggerat tribe stood in jeopardy. His reputation as protector of his own household suffered. Most importantly, failure to respond would signal weakness across the steppe. He could not rescue Borte alone. Instead, he sought help from two men whose roles would shape the coming years. The first was Togrul, powerful ruler of the Karates and longtime ally of Temüjin's late father. The second was Jamukha. Jamukha occupied a unique place in Temüjin's life. As young men, they had sworn themselves to one another as Anda. The Mongol concept of Anda extended beyond ordinary friendship. It represented chosen brotherhood. Two men bound themselves by loyalty stronger than blood. Each pledged lifelong support. Each promised never to betray the other. For a time, Temüjin and Jamukha appeared destined to rise together. Both possessed talent. Both inspired followers. Both dreamed of greater influence across the steppe. When Temüjin requested assistance against the Merkit, both answered. The alliance assembled a combined force drawn from several tribes. Speed became their greatest advantage. Rather than allowing the Merkit time to prepare, they struck unexpectedly. The attack succeeded. Merkit resistance collapsed. Borte was rescued. The victory transformed Temüjin's reputation. He had coordinated powerful allies. He had recovered his wife. He had demonstrated determination under pressure. More people now looked toward him as a leader worth following. Yet hidden beneath the triumph lay future complications. Not long after her rescue, Borte gave birth to a son named Joki. Although Temüjin publicly accepted the child without hesitation, whispers spread among rivals regarding Joki's parentage because of Borte's captivity. Those whispers never completely disappeared. Decades later, they would influence debates over succession at the highest levels of the Mongol Empire. Temüjin, however, refused to allow gossip to dictate his decisions. He treated Joki as his eldest son. More importantly, he continued building something larger than a single family. Followers from many tribes began arriving at his camp. Some sought protection. Others admired his fairness. Many had grown tired of endless aristocratic feuds. Temüjin offered something different. He rewarded service. He shared spoils more evenly than many rival chiefs. He listened to capable men regardless of birth. These policies slowly attracted warriors, herders, craftsmen, and entire families. The camp expanded. Its identity changed. People no longer gathered solely because they belonged to one bloodline. They gathered because they believed in one leader. That distinction would eventually transform the history of Eurasia. Long before the name Genghis Khan echoed across continents, before kings trembled at the sight of Mongol horsemen appearing on the horizon, and before the largest contiguous land empire in human history emerged from the grasslands of Central Asia, there was only an endless sea of wind and grass. Across the vast Mongolian steppe, the landscape seemed almost without end. Rolling plains stretched beyond the horizon. Mountains rose in the distance. Rivers carved narrow paths through the wilderness. The seasons ruled every aspect of life. The summer brought rich grazing lands. The winter brought bitter cold that could wipe out entire herds. To survive in such an unforgiving world required strength, adaptability, and constant vigilance. This was not a place where walls protected people. This was not a place where cities offered safety. Everything depended upon movement. Everything depended upon horses. Everything depended upon loyalty. During the middle of the 12th century, the steppe was divided among dozens of tribes and clans. Each possessed its own traditions. Each defended its own grazing lands. Each sought advantage over its rivals. The names of these tribes would later become famous throughout history. The Karates, the Naimans, the Tatars, the Merkits, the Tayikid, the Mongols. Yet despite sharing similar ways of life, they were rarely united. Old feuds passed from one generation to another. Blood debts lasted decades. A raid carried out by one clan demanded revenge from another. That revenge created another grievance. The cycle rarely ended. No single ruler controlled the entire steppe. Power rested with tribal chiefs who had to earn loyalty every single day. A leader who could not provide food, protection, or victory quickly lost followers. Men simply left with their families and livestock to join someone stronger. Authority was never guaranteed. It had to be constantly defended. Unlike many kingdoms farther south, there were no permanent capitals. There were no marble palaces. There were no elaborate bureaucracies. A ruler's wealth moved with him. Entire communities packed their homes into carts pulled by oxen. Large felt tents known today as yurts could be dismantled in hours. Families followed fresh pastures wherever the seasons demanded. Mobility was not merely convenient. It was essential. Children learned to ride almost as soon as they could walk. A horse was more than transportation. It was survival. It provided speed. It provided milk. It carried supplies. It offered an advantage in hunting and warfare that few settled civilizations could truly understand. By adulthood, nearly every man on the steppe had become an accomplished horseman. Many could loose arrows accurately while riding at full speed. They hunted wolves. They tracked deer. They endured storms that would have overwhelmed armies raised in more comfortable lands. Life itself became preparation for war. To outsiders, the steppe often appeared empty. Travelers crossing its endless grasslands saw little besides distant camps and grazing animals. Yet beneath that apparent emptiness existed an intricate political world. Marriage alliances shaped diplomacy. Personal friendships could alter the balance of power. Ancient rivalries determined whether tribes traded peacefully or met each other in battle. Honor carried immense weight. So did reputation. A leader remembered for generosity attracted followers. A leader known for weakness quickly found himself abandoned. Religion reflected the natural world surrounding these nomads. Many practiced forms of shamanism centered upon spirits, ancestors, and the eternal blue sky. Above everything stood Tingri, the eternal heaven. The supreme force believed to guide destiny. Victory in battle, the rise of rulers, the fall of kingdoms. Many believed all unfolded beneath Tungri's will. This belief would later become deeply connected with the authority claimed by Genghis Khan himself. Women also held important responsibilities. While the men often rode to war or hunted across the plains, women managed households, supervised livestock, organized camps, and maintained the daily life that allowed the tribes to survive. Some advised powerful leaders. Others handled negotiations. Their influence was often greater than many neighboring civilizations expected. Far to the south, powerful dynasties watched these nomads with caution. The Jin dynasty ruled northern China. The Tangut kingdom, known as Western Xia, controlled valuable territory to the northwest. These settled states viewed the steppe as both threat and opportunity. Sometimes they traded silk, grain, and luxury goods with tribal leaders. Sometimes they recruited steppe warriors as allies. Sometimes they deliberately encouraged conflict between rival tribes. Dividing the nomads prevented any single leader from becoming powerful enough to threaten China's northern frontier. For generations, this strategy worked. Whenever one tribe grew stronger, another received gifts or military support. Balance replaced unity. Conflict replaced cooperation. Among the tribes favored at various times by the Jin dynasty were the Tatars. This relationship deepened resentment across the steppe. Many Mongol families blamed both the Tatars and the Jin court for years of suffering. Those memories would not be forgotten. They would eventually fuel one of history's greatest campaigns of revenge. Within this fractured world lived one relatively modest clan known as the Borjigin. Though respected for noble ancestry, they possessed little real political influence. Their fortunes depended upon the leadership of a chieftain named Yasujii. He was neither emperor nor king. He commanded only a limited following. Yet he understood the fragile art of steppe politics. He formed alliances where possible. He defended his people whenever necessary. Among his closest relationships stood Togrul, leader of the powerful Karait tribe. That friendship would later shape the destiny of Yasujii's young son. Yasujii's wife was Holon. Her own story reflected the harsh customs of the age. Years earlier, she had been taken by Yasujii during a raid while traveling with another man. Such abductions, though brutal, were not uncommon across the steppe. Marriage often followed conquest rather than courtship. Out of this union came several children. One of them would forever alter world history. Around the year 1162, although historians continued debating the precise date, Holon gave birth near the Onan River. According to later tradition, the newborn arrived clutching a blood clot in his hand. To many Mongols, this unusual sign suggested a child destined for greatness. Whether the story reflected genuine memory or a later legend remains impossible to know. What is certain is that the boy entered a world defined by uncertainty. He received the name Temüjin. The reason behind that name has fascinated historians for centuries. One tradition claims that Yasujii had recently captured a Tatar warrior bearing the same name. Naming his son after a defeated enemy may have symbolized triumph. Others believe the name carried associations with iron and strength. Either way, the child called Temüjin began life with no indication that he would one day become master of much of Eurasia. His earliest years resembled those of countless other children growing up on the steppe. He learned to ride. He observed hunting expeditions. He watched adults negotiate alliances around evening fires. He absorbed the unwritten rules governing loyalty, hospitality, and revenge. Even childhood involved responsibility. Every family member contributed to survival. Livestock required constant care. Food had to be gathered. Danger always remained close. Predators threatened herds. Enemy raiders could appear without warning. Nature itself demanded endurance. Temüjin's father sought to strengthen the family's position through marriage diplomacy. When the boy reached roughly 9 years of age, Yasujii arranged his betrothal to a girl named Borte from the influential Ongjarat tribe. Such marriages were political agreements before they became personal relationships. The alliance promised mutual support between families. Following custom, Temüjin remained with Borte's relatives while his father began the journey home. He never completed it. Along the way, Yasujii encountered Tatars. They recognized him. Old enemies rarely forgot familiar faces. Feigning hospitality, they invited him to share food. Instead, they secretly poisoned him. The toxin worked slowly. Yasujii managed to reach his own camp before dying. His death shattered everything. The consequences reached far beyond personal grief. Without a strong adult leader, his family immediately lost protection. The followers who had once acknowledged Yasujii abandoned his widow and children. Rather than supporting young Temüjin as successor, rival clans rejected the family completely. Holon suddenly found herself alone. She faced the impossible task of raising several children without powerful allies, sufficient livestock, or tribal backing. For many families, such abandonment meant death. The steppe showed little mercy to the vulnerable. Yet Holon refused to surrender. Gathering her children together, she led them into isolation. They survived by fishing rivers. They collected edible roots. They hunted small animals. They searched endlessly for anything capable of sustaining life. The family experienced hunger almost constantly. Winter became especially cruel. Food disappeared. Animals died. Every day demanded new resourcefulness. Temüjin grew up understanding deprivation in ways few future conquerors. He knew what it meant to watch stronger people turn away. He knew what it meant to rely entirely upon family. These experiences would shape nearly every decision he later made as ruler. Loyalty became priceless because betrayal had nearly destroyed him. Merit mattered because inherited status had failed his family when they needed it most. Hardship also revealed tensions within the household itself. Resources remained scarce. Authority became contested. Temüjin's older half-brother Begtur attempted to assert dominance over the family. The disagreement escalated beyond argument. Together with his full brother Khazar, Temüjin confronted Begtur. The encounter ended in violence. Begtur was killed. From a modern perspective, the act appears shocking. Within the brutal realities of the steppe, however, control over food and leadership often became matters of survival. The incident revealed something significant about Temüjin's developing character. He would not quietly accept another person's authority if he believed it threatened his family's future. Years later, he would display the same determination on a vastly larger stage. Despite overwhelming hardship, Temüjin slowly built friendships outside his immediate family. These relationships became some of the most important of his life. One young man named Borshu joined him after helping recover stolen horses. Another named Jelm would later prove equally devoted. Neither belonged to Temüjin's closest blood relatives. Both earned trust through action. This pattern became central to Temüjin's leadership. He increasingly valued demonstrated loyalty above noble ancestry. In a society obsessed with lineage, that idea represented a quiet revolution. Not everyone accepted his growing influence. The Teyikiad, rivals connected to older political disputes, eventually captured him. They placed a heavy wooden cane around his neck to prevent escape. The device restricted movement and symbolized complete humiliation. For many prisoners, such captivity ended in slavery or death. Temüjin refused to surrender hope. One night he escaped. Accounts preserved in the secret history of the Mongols describe how a sympathetic guard named Sorkin Shira and his family concealed the fugitive despite enormous personal risk. Whether every detail can be verified remains uncertain. What matters historically is the broader pattern. Again and again, individuals chose to help Temüjin despite the danger. Something about his personality inspired extraordinary loyalty. He remembered those acts throughout his life. Years later, many families who aided him during obscurity received positions of honor after his rise to power. Unlike rulers who forgot early supporters, Temüjin built his future upon remembered loyalty. As adolescence gave way to adulthood, he returned to claim Borte as his wife. Their marriage fulfilled the agreement arranged years earlier by Yasuji. For Temüjin, Borte became far more than a political partner. Throughout his rise, she remained one of his closest advisors and most trusted companions. The alliance with her family strengthened his fragile position. Yet happiness remained brief. Old enemies still watched. The Merkit tribe carried a long memory. Years before, Yasuji had abducted Holan from one of their men. Now, they sought revenge through the next generation. Without warning, Merkit warriors attacked Temüjin's camp. The assault scattered his followers. Borte was captured and carried away. For Temüjin, the loss reached beyond personal heartbreak. It threatened everything. His political alliance with the Ongjurat tribe stood in jeopardy. His reputation as protector of his own household suffered. Most importantly, failure to respond would signal weakness across the steppe. He could not rescue Borte alone. Instead, he sought help from two men whose roles would shape the coming years. The first was Togrul, powerful ruler of the Karates and longtime ally of Temüjin's late father. The second was Jamukha. Jamukha occupied a unique place in Temüjin's life. As young men, they had sworn themselves to one another as Anda. The Mongol concept of Anda extended beyond ordinary friendship. It represented chosen brotherhood. Two men bound themselves by loyalty stronger than blood. Each pledged lifelong support. Each promised never to betray the other. For a time, Temüjin and Jamukha appeared destined to rise together. Both possessed talent. Both inspired followers. Both dreamed of greater influence across the steppe. When Temüjin requested assistance against the Merkit, both answered. The alliance assembled a combined force drawn from several tribes. Speed became their greatest advantage. Rather than allowing the Merkit time to prepare, they struck unexpectedly. The attack succeeded. Merkit resistance collapsed. Borte was rescued. The victory transformed Temüjin's reputation. He had coordinated powerful allies. He had recovered his wife. He had demonstrated determination under pressure. More people now looked toward him as a leader worth following. Yet hidden beneath the triumph lay future complications. Not long after her rescue, Borte gave birth to a son named Joki. Although Temüjin publicly accepted the child without hesitation, whispers spread among rivals regarding Joki's parentage because of Borte's captivity. Those whispers never completely disappeared. Decades later, they would influence debates over succession at the highest levels of the Mongol Empire. Temüjin, however, refused to allow gossip to dictate his decisions. He treated Joki as his eldest son. More importantly, he continued building something larger than a single family. Followers from many tribes began arriving at his camp. Some sought protection. Others admired his fairness. Many had grown tired of endless aristocratic feuds. Temüjin offered something different. He rewarded service. He shared spoils more evenly than many rival chiefs. He listened to capable men regardless of birth. These policies slowly attracted warriors, herders, craftsmen, and entire families. The camp expanded. Its identity changed. People no longer gathered solely because they belonged to one bloodline. They gathered because they believed in one leader. That distinction would eventually transform the history of Eurasia. As Temüjin's following continued to grow, the balance of power across the Mongolian steppe began to change in ways that few could yet fully appreciate. For generations, alliances had formed and dissolved with remarkable speed. A tribe might stand beside another in one season and raid the same neighbor the next. Promises were often temporary. Loyalty frequently lasted only as long as success. Temüjin intended to build something far more durable. His camp was no longer simply the household of an ambitious young chieftain. It was becoming the center of an entirely new political movement. One by one, families dissatisfied with the traditional aristocracy packed their possessions, gathered their herds, and joined him. Some came because they admired his victories. Others came because they had personally witnessed his fairness. Many arrived because they believed that under Temüjin they would have opportunities denied to them elsewhere. This steady migration alarmed established tribal nobles. For centuries, status had depended upon ancestry. Ancient bloodlines determined influence. The sons of powerful families expected command simply because of birth. Temüjin challenged that assumption every time he promoted a capable shepherd over a nobleman who had failed his responsibilities. He rewarded courage. He rewarded discipline. He rewarded loyalty. In doing so, he quietly undermined the foundations of the old order. No one watched these developments more carefully than Jamukha. The bond between the two men had once appeared unbreakable. They had shared meals. They had hunted together. They had sworn eternal brotherhood. Yet, as their influence expanded, profound differences emerged. Jamukha believed that the traditional structure of steppe society should remain intact. Power, in his view, naturally belonged to the established aristocracy. Temüjin increasingly believed that talent mattered more than noble ancestry. These competing ideas transformed personal friendship into political rivalry. It unfolded gradually. Small disagreements became larger ones. Followers drifted from one camp to the other. Every new supporter Temüjin gained represented one fewer supporter available to Jamukha. Eventually, the two leaders separated completely. The friendship that had once promised to reshape the steppe together now stood on opposite sides of an emerging struggle. Temüjin continued strengthening his organization. Rather than allowing warriors to remain grouped solely by clan, he began introducing a different system. Men served alongside companions from various tribes. Shared service gradually replaced inherited divisions. This change reduced the likelihood that entire military units would abandon him if tribal loyalties resurfaced. It also encouraged soldiers to think of themselves as members of one larger community. The concept appears simple today. At the time, it represented a remarkable innovation. Temüjin understood that if he hoped to unite the steppe, he first had to weaken the divisions that had kept it fragmented for generations. He also became increasingly selective about those entrusted with responsibility. Command was not given as a reward for noble birth. It had to be earned. Those who demonstrated judgment received greater authority. Those who failed could lose it. The principle encouraged initiative. It also built extraordinary loyalty among capable followers who recognized that their future depended upon performance rather than family connections. This atmosphere attracted talented individuals from many backgrounds. Some would later become legendary commanders. Among them was Subutai. Unlike many aristocratic leaders of the steppe, Subutai came from relatively modest origins. He belonged to the Uriankai people and was the son of a blacksmith. In many societies of the period, such a background would have limited his opportunities forever. Temüjin saw something different. He recognized intelligence. He recognized determination. He recognized strategic ability. Over time, Subutai would become one of history's greatest military commanders. His rise perfectly illustrated the principles upon which Temüjin was building his movement. Another future legend entered his service under extraordinary circumstances. During one battle against rival forces, an enemy archer struck Temüjin's horse with remarkable accuracy. After the fighting ended, Temüjin demanded to know who had fired the arrow. Instead of hiding, the warrior stepped forward. He admitted responsibility openly. His honesty impressed Temüjin. Rather than ordering his execution, he recruited him. The archer became known as Jib, meaning arrow. He too would eventually rank among the empire's greatest generals. Such decisions revealed an unusual pattern. Temüjin often preferred to gain capable enemies rather than destroy them. If a defeated opponent demonstrated loyalty after surrender, he could become one of the Khan's most trusted servants. This practical approach steadily expanded the pool of talent available to him. At the same time, it sent a powerful message across the steppe. Submission offered opportunity. Resistance carried consequences. Around this period, Temüjin's followers gathered to proclaim him Khan. The title itself was not unprecedented. Many tribal rulers had used it before. The significance lay elsewhere. This was no longer merely recognition by one clan. Supporters from multiple backgrounds acknowledged his leadership. The gathering reflected the emergence of a broader coalition. To many traditional nobles, however, the ceremony represented a dangerous challenge. Jamukha interpreted it as confirmation that his former Anda intended to replace the existing order entirely. He responded by assembling a powerful alliance of aristocratic clans. Many influential leaders rallied behind him. Their objective extended beyond defeating Temüjin. They hoped to preserve the traditional balance of power that had governed the steppe for generations. The confrontation became unavoidable. The opposing forces eventually met near a place remembered in historical sources as Dalenbal's hut. Precise details remain debated among historians. Even the exact location is uncertain. What is clear is that the engagement marked one of the earliest major tests of Temüjin's growing movement. Jamukha possessed numerical superiority. His coalition included many experienced tribal warriors. Temüjin relied upon a smaller but increasingly disciplined force. The fighting proved fierce. Temüjin's men initially resisted with determination. Their organization allowed them to hold together under tremendous pressure. Yet numbers eventually prevailed. Jamukha's larger army overwhelmed them. Recognizing the danger of complete destruction, Temüjin ordered a withdrawal. The decision undoubtedly carried humiliation, yet it also preserved the core of his movement. Had he fought to the last man, everything he had built might have disappeared forever. Instead, he chose survival over pride. The aftermath of the battle would shape the future more profoundly than the battle itself. Jamukha captured many of Temüjin's officers. Rather than treating them according to accepted customs of the steppe, he ordered a horrifying execution. According to the secret history of the Mongols and several later traditions, around 70 prisoners were boiled alive. Whether every detail of the account is historically precise remains uncertain. What is significant is that multiple sources portray the punishment as exceptionally cruel, even by the standards of the era. The executions shocked many observers. Violence was common. War was expected. Yet excessive brutality could damage a leader's reputation. Jamukha intended to inspire fear. Instead, many neutral tribes began questioning his judgment. Temüjin's defeat unexpectedly generated sympathy. His rival's victory created unease. Retreating into remote regions near the upper Onan River, Temüjin faced another defining moment. His movement had suffered serious losses. Some followers inevitably drifted away. Many remained. Those who stayed did so because they believed in the leader rather than immediate success. Temüjin never forgot that distinction. During this difficult period, he spent less time seeking revenge than rebuilding. He evaluated every mistake. He refined his methods. He strengthened internal discipline. Defeat became education. He recognized that larger armies could not always be confronted directly. Future victories would require flexibility. They would require deception. They would require patience. Many of the tactical methods later associated with Mongol warfare matured during these years. Rapid maneuver, carefully coordinated attacks, feigned retreats designed to lure enemies into vulnerable positions, superior intelligence gathering. constant communication between units. None emerged overnight. They developed through experience, experimentation, and careful observation. Temüjin also devoted increasing attention to organization. His followers continued to be arranged into decimal units. Groups of 10 formed the foundation. 10 groups became 100. 10 hundreds became 1,000. 10,000s created larger formations capable of independent action. The system simplified command. It also weakened tribal divisions because soldiers served alongside men from different backgrounds. Orders moved quickly through clearly defined chains of authority. Every individual understood where he belonged. The structure later became one of the defining strengths of the Mongol military. Discipline extended beyond the battlefield. Temüjin increasingly expected honesty within his camp. Loot was distributed according to established rules. Cowardice invited punishment. Service brought reward. Although what later became known as the Yasa had not yet fully developed into a formal legal code, many of its underlying principles already guided daily life. The atmosphere contrasted sharply with the arbitrary leadership practiced by many rivals. People increasingly believed that joining Temüjin offered stability as well as opportunity. His reputation spread steadily. Families who had remained uncertain now reconsidered. Warriors seeking advancement looked toward his camp. Even individuals from former enemy tribes began requesting admission. Temüjin rarely rejected sincere offers of loyalty. Every new arrival represented both additional strength and further proof that his ideas were working. Meanwhile, his relationship with Togrul, the powerful ruler of the Karates, continued providing important political support. Togrul had known Temüjin's father. He viewed the younger man almost as an adopted son. Their alliance benefited both sides. Temüjin gained legitimacy through association with an established ruler. Togrul gained an increasingly capable military partner. Together, they conducted campaigns against mutual enemies. Among their principal targets remained the Merkids, who had previously kidnapped Borte. Repeated defeats steadily weakened Merkid influence. Each victory enhanced Temüjin's prestige. At the same time, Jamukha watched his rival's recovery with growing concern. He had expected defeat to destroy Temüjin permanently. Instead, the opposite occurred. The man who had lost the battle seemed stronger than before. His organization became more disciplined. His followers appeared increasingly devoted. Traditional aristocrats struggled to understand why ordinary herders and younger sons continued abandoning old loyalties for this rising leader. The answer lay not merely in military success. Temüjin offered people a future they could not easily find elsewhere. A capable man might become a commander. A faithful servant might receive responsibility regardless of ancestry. Families could expect more predictable treatment. Such opportunities possessed tremendous appeal. As the years passed, the rivalry between Temüjin and Jamukha expanded beyond two individuals. It became a contest between two competing visions for the future of the steppe. One vision sought to preserve inherited privilege. The other aimed to replace it with a broader political community built upon personal loyalty and demonstrated ability. Neither side could coexist indefinitely. The struggle would eventually determine not only who ruled the Mongols, but whether the Mongols themselves would remain divided or become something entirely new. During these same years, Temüjin continued strengthening diplomatic relationships through marriage alliances negotiated agreements, and carefully chosen acts of generosity. He understood that conquest alone could not build lasting authority. People had to believe cooperation served their interests. Whenever possible, he encouraged voluntary submission rather than endless warfare. Those who accepted his leadership often retained considerable local authority. Those who resisted repeatedly faced increasingly severe consequences. This combination of flexibility and firmness became another hallmark of his rule. His closest companions also matured into experienced leaders. Boworshu proved invaluable in organizing cavalry. Jelm repeatedly distinguished himself through courage. Subutai displayed an extraordinary ability to anticipate enemy movements. Jib demonstrated boldness that bordered on recklessness, but frequently produced remarkable results. These men did not simply obey orders. They learned to think independently. Temüjin encouraged initiative provided it served the broader objective. Centuries later, military historians would recognize this decentralized command style as one of the Mongol army's greatest strengths. Senior commanders understood the overall mission. They possessed freedom to adapt according to changing circumstances. Such flexibility often overwhelmed more rigid opponents. Another important development occurred within Temüjin's household. His family continued expanding. His sons gradually grew older. Though succession remained a distant concern, the existence of multiple heirs reflected increasing stability. Borte remained an influential presence. Historical sources consistently portray her as one of Temüjin's most respected companions. She had endured hardship beside him from the beginning. Her opinions carried weight. The household itself became an example of the loyalty Temüjin expected throughout his growing coalition. By the close of the 12th century, the political landscape of Mongolia had changed dramatically. Temüjin was no longer an abandoned orphan struggling merely to survive. He commanded thousands of followers. He possessed experienced generals. He maintained important alliances. He had recovered from defeat. Most importantly, he had demonstrated an extraordinary ability to transform adversity into strength. Across the grasslands, people increasingly recognized that the balance of power was shifting. Many still resisted him. Many feared him. Others admired him. Almost no one ignored him. The years ahead would bring conflicts even greater than those already endured. Former allies would become enemies. Powerful tribes that had dominated the steppe for generations would soon confront a leader unlike any they had faced before. Temüjin's greatest tests were still approaching, and before he could dream of conquering kingdoms beyond the steppe, he first had to unite the steppe itself. By the closing years of the 12th century, the struggle for dominance across the Mongolian steppe had entered an entirely new phase. The conflicts were no longer isolated raids between neighboring tribes. They had become part of a much larger contest. Every alliance, every marriage, every military campaign, every act of loyalty or betrayal, all of it now revolved around one central question: who would shape the future of the steppe? Temüjin had survived abandonment. He had survived poverty. He had survived imprisonment. He had survived military defeat. Each setback had strengthened rather than weakened him. Now he stood at the head of a growing coalition that challenged centuries of tribal tradition. His supporters no longer viewed him as simply another ambitious chief. Many believed they were helping create something entirely new. Yet the greatest obstacles still stood before him. Among those obstacles None appeared more important than his relationship with Togrul, the ruler of the Karaites. For years, the alliance had benefited both men. Togrul possessed prestige, territory, and an established reputation. Temüjin brought discipline, energy, and increasingly successful military leadership. Together, they had defeated common enemies. Together, they had strengthened their influence across eastern Mongolia. To outside observers, the partnership looked almost unbreakable. But politics on the steppe rarely remained stable for long. Success often created new tensions. As Temüjin's reputation continued growing, some members of the Karaite court began to worry. Among them was Togrul's son, Sungum. He watched Temüjin attract more followers every year. He saw warriors leaving other tribes to serve under the younger leader. He heard stories praising Temüjin's fairness and military skill. To Sungum, these developments appeared dangerous. He feared that his father's trusted ally might eventually become his greatest rival. Historical sources suggest that jealousy and suspicion gradually poisoned the relationship between the two camps. Whether every accusation was genuine or deliberately exaggerated remains uncertain. Like many political struggles, the breakdown emerged from multiple causes rather than a single dramatic incident. Rumors spread. Advisors whispered warnings. Old allies began questioning each other's intentions. Temüjin reportedly even considered strengthening the alliance further through marriage arrangements between the two families. Those discussions collapsed. Distrust had already advanced too far. Eventually, Sungum and his supporters decided to act before Temüjin became even stronger. According to the secret history of the Mongols, they planned a surprise attack disguised beneath the appearance of friendship. Temüjin received advance warning. The exact source remains debated. Some traditions credit loyal informants within the Karaites. Others suggest relatives sympathetic to Temüjin secretly revealed the conspiracy. Whatever the truth, the warning arrived just in time. Temüjin escaped with only a portion of his followers. The sudden attack scattered his camp. Families became separated. Supplies were lost. For a brief moment, it appeared that years of careful progress might once again disappear. Yet history had already shown that Temüjin possessed a remarkable ability to recover from disaster. Rather than surrendering to despair, he gathered surviving companions. He reassured frightened families. He reorganized scattered warriors. Slowly, the coalition reformed. This time, however, the objective differed. Temüjin no longer sought reconciliation. The betrayal had convinced him that coexistence with rival power centers had become impossible. The Karaites would have to be defeated. Preparations began immediately. Messengers rode across the grasslands. Allied tribes were summoned. Commanders assembled their units. Temüjin emphasized careful planning. He understood the strength of his opponent. Victory would require discipline rather than reckless courage. When the campaign finally unfolded, the results transformed the political landscape. The Karaite forces suffered a series of defeats. Many warriors surrendered. Others simply transferred their loyalty to Temüjin once it became clear which side possessed the momentum. Togrul himself attempted to flee westward. Accounts differ concerning his final moments. Most agree that he died while trying to escape, reportedly killed by Naaman guards who failed to recognize him. With his death, one of the most influential tribal confederations on the steppe ceased to exist as an independent power. Temüjin handled the aftermath with characteristic pragmatism. He did not seek the destruction of every defeated family. Instead, he absorbed large numbers of former Kharat followers into his own organization. Experienced administrators entered his service. Skilled warriors joined his army. Families willing to swear loyalty received protection. In doing so, he increased his own strength while preventing future resistance. The victory carried another important lesson. Temüjin had now defeated not merely isolated enemies, but one of the strongest tribal confederations in Mongolia. His reputation spread farther than ever before. Some tribes chose submission without battle. Others began quietly preparing for inevitable confrontation. Only one major rival now remained powerful enough to challenge his ambitions: the Naimans. Occupying extensive territory to the west, the Naimans possessed considerable military resources. They also enjoyed a long tradition of political influence. Their ruler, Tayang Khan, recognized the danger represented by Temüjin's expanding coalition. Rather than accepting the new order, he prepared for war. At the same time, Jamukha found himself increasingly isolated. Many aristocrats who had once supported him reconsidered their position. Some had grown disillusioned after earlier defeats. Others simply recognized that Temüjin now possessed greater momentum. Jamukha therefore sought alliance with the Naimans. Former rivals became partners because necessity demanded cooperation. Their shared objective was simple: stop Temüjin before no one remained capable of resisting him. The campaign against the Naimans would become one of the decisive struggles in the unification of Mongolia. Both sides understood its significance. A victory for Temüjin would eliminate the final great obstacle standing between him and complete supremacy across the steppe. A defeat could unravel everything he had built. Before battle, Temüjin devoted careful attention to morale. He reminded his followers of the hardships they had overcome together. He emphasized unity. He rewarded loyalty publicly. He ensured that commanders understood their responsibilities. Discipline remained the foundation of every plan. The two armies eventually confronted one another in Western Mongolia. Sources differ regarding precise troop numbers. Medieval chroniclers frequently exaggerated military strength. Modern historians generally focus less upon exact figures and more upon the broader strategic picture. Temüjin once again relied upon organization. His decimal military structure allowed rapid communication. Units supported one another instead of acting independently. Commanders understood both immediate objectives and larger strategy. The Naimans fought bravely. They possessed experienced cavalry. They knew the terrain. Yet their coalition lacked the cohesion that had become Temüjin's greatest advantage. As fighting intensified, coordination began breaking down. Temüjin's forces exploited every weakness. Pressure increased across the battlefield. Eventually, resistance collapsed. The Naiman leadership fragmented. Some fled. Others died in combat. The Confederation ceased to function as an effective rival. Among those escaping the battlefield was Kuklug, son of Tayang Khan. Although he survived, his future would eventually intersect with the Mongols again, far beyond Mongolia itself. For the moment, however, the steppe belonged to Temüjin. Jamukha escaped as well. The man who had once been Temüjin's sworn brother now wandered with only a handful of loyal followers. His political vision had failed. The aristocratic order he sought to preserve lay in ruins. Even many of his remaining supporters recognized reality. Eventually, several companions betrayed him. Seeking favor with the victorious leader, they captured Jamukha and delivered him to Temüjin. The meeting between the former Andas became one of the most remembered episodes in Mongol history. Different versions survive. Exact dialogue cannot be confirmed. The broad outline, however, appears consistently across historical traditions. Temüjin rejected the betrayal committed by those who had handed over their own leader. According to the secret history, he ordered the execution of the men who had betrayed Jamukha. The decision reflected one of his deepest principles. Loyalty mattered. Even loyalty shown toward an enemy deserved respect. A man willing to betray his master today might betray another tomorrow. Temüjin then turned his attention to Jamukha himself. Sources indicate that he offered reconciliation. Some accounts suggest he even proposed that they once again rule together. Jamukha declined. He reportedly acknowledged that only one ruler could unite the Mongols. Rather than live as a subordinate, he requested an honorable death without the shedding of blood. Exactly how his execution occurred remains uncertain. Most traditions state that his back was broken, a method considered to preserve the body according to steppe custom. Whatever the precise details, the death of Jamukha marked far more than the end of one man. It symbolized the end of an era. The old political order had fallen. The centuries of competing aristocratic confederations had given way to something entirely different. For the first time in recorded history, nearly all the major Mongol tribes stood under one leader. Temüjin now faced a challenge unlike any before. Winning power had proven difficult. Keeping it would prove even harder. He understood that unity could not survive through military victory alone. It required institutions. It required law. It required a shared identity stronger than individual clan loyalties. He therefore expanded the reforms that had begun years earlier. Military organization became more standardized. Command appointments continued emphasizing merit. Families from formerly hostile tribes were deliberately mixed together. Potential rebellions became less likely because old tribal divisions weakened over time. He also strengthened legal expectations throughout his domains. Although historians continue debating exactly when the Yasa took shape and how much of it survives reliably, there is broad agreement that Temüjin established firm rules governing loyalty, discipline, theft, military conduct, and the responsibilities owed between ruler and subject. The objective extended beyond punishment. He wanted predictability. People needed confidence that justice would not depend solely upon personal relationships. Within practical limits, rules applied broadly. This consistency encouraged trust. Trade also received greater protection. Merchants crossing Mongol territory increasingly found safer conditions than had existed during generations of tribal warfare. Temüjin recognized that commerce enriched everyone. Skilled craftsmen received encouragement. Messengers moved more freely. Contacts with neighboring states expanded. The leader who had once struggled merely to feed his own family now supervised an increasingly sophisticated political system. Perhaps his most revolutionary achievement involved identity itself. Previously, people primarily thought of themselves according to tribe. They were Karate, Naaman, Merkit, Borjigin, Taikiad. Temüjin encouraged something broader. He spoke increasingly of the Mongols as one people. The transformation did not happen overnight. Old loyalties remained powerful. Yet every military campaign fought together. Every marriage linking different clans. Every shared victory, all gradually strengthened this larger identity. By the beginning of the 13th century, the transformation could no longer be ignored. Leaders from across the unified steppe gathered for one of the most significant assemblies in Mongol history. The traditional gathering known as the Kurultai met near the headwaters of the Onon River. Representatives of the major tribes attended. Generals stood beside clan leaders. Veteran companions who had shared Temüjin's earliest hardships witnessed the culmination of decades of struggle. The gathering carried immense symbolic importance. This was not merely another election of a tribal chief. It represented the formal birth of a new political order. During the assembly, Temüjin received a new title. From that moment onward, he would be known as Genghis Khan. The precise meaning of the title remains debated among historians. Some interpret it as universal ruler. Others suggest meanings connected with vastness or oceanic authority. Although scholars differ over linguistic details, all agree that the title signified authority far beyond that of an ordinary tribal Khan. It announced the arrival of a ruler whose ambitions extended beyond the steppe itself. The proclamation reflected more than military success. It acknowledged a transformation in political thought. The Mongols were no longer merely a collection of competing tribes. They had become the foundation of a centralized state. Trusted commanders received official responsibilities. The decimal military organization became permanent. Administrative duties expanded. Diplomatic relations with neighboring powers acquired new significance. Above all, loyalty shifted toward the office of the Great Khan rather than individual tribal chiefs. The world beyond Mongolia had not yet fully grasped what had happened. To many neighboring rulers, the events on the steppe seemed like another temporary rise of a successful nomadic leader. History offered many examples of powerful confederations that soon dissolved after their founders died. Few imagined that this new state would survive. Fewer still imagined that within a generation, its armies would ride from the Pacific coast to the plains of Eastern Europe. Standing before the assembled tribes, Genghis Khan had accomplished something no previous leader had achieved. He had united the Mongols. But in his eyes, this achievement represented not the end of his life's work. It was only the beginning. Beyond the southern deserts lay wealthy kingdoms. Beyond the mountain ranges stood ancient empires. Beyond the borders of the steppes stretched trade routes, carrying silk, gold, spices, knowledge, and unimaginable wealth. The newly united Mongol nation possessed extraordinary military strength. Thousands of experienced horsemen now answered to one command. The question was no longer whether they would fight. The question was where they would ride first. Their answer would come from the southwest. There, beyond the edge of the grasslands, stood the fortified kingdom of Western Xia. It would become the first great test of the empire that Genghis Khan had spent his entire life creating. When the great assembly ended and Temüjin was recognized as Genghis Khan, the political landscape of the steppe had changed forever. For the first time in living memory, the scattered Mongol tribes answered to a single ruler. The decades of feuds that had consumed generations had not vanished overnight. Old rivalries still lingered beneath the surface. Families still remembered past betrayals. Former enemies now lived side by side within the same growing state. Genghis Khan understood that unity could not survive on memories alone. A nation created through struggle required purpose. Without a common objective, old divisions might return. Without new opportunities, ambitious warriors might once again turn their weapons against one another. For centuries, successful leaders on the steppe had often directed internal tensions outward. Raids against neighboring territories provided wealth. Military campaigns rewarded loyal followers. Victories reinforced political authority. Genghis Khan appreciated these realities. But unlike many earlier tribal rulers, he did not think only in terms of seasonal raids. He envisioned sustained campaigns. He envisioned lasting influence. He envisioned an empire. The first target lay to the southwest. The kingdom known today as Western Xia occupied a strategically important position between the Mongolian steppe, northwestern China, and the great trade routes of Central Asia. Ruled by the Tangut people, Western Xia controlled the Hashi Corridor, one of the most valuable commercial gateways along the Silk Road. Caravans carrying silk, spices, precious metals, horses, and countless other goods regularly passed through its territory. Its rulers had spent generations balancing diplomacy with military preparedness. They traded with neighboring states. They negotiated with nomadic tribes. They defended a chain of fortified cities stretching across difficult terrain. To many observers, Western Xia appeared well positioned to withstand pressure from the north. Its cities possessed walls. Its government maintained experienced administrators. Its armies included infantry, cavalry, and engineers accustomed to defending permanent settlements. Yet these strengths also reflected a way of warfare fundamentally different from that practiced by the Mongols. Genghis Khan recognized both the opportunities and the risks. Attacking a sedentary kingdom demanded new methods. The horse archers who had dominated the open steppe could not simply gallop through stone walls. Sieges required patience. They required engineering. They required logistics capable of supporting armies for months rather than days. Rather than seeing these differences as obstacles, Genghis Khan viewed them as challenges to overcome. His willingness to learn from conquered peoples would become one of the defining characteristics of Mongol expansion. The campaign against Western Xia began around 1207. Mongol forces crossed into Tangut territory with remarkable speed. Instead of concentrating every soldier into one massive army, Genghis Khan divided his forces into coordinated columns. Each moved independently, while remaining connected through messengers and carefully planned objectives. This flexibility complicated enemy defenses. The Tanguts struggled to predict where the main attack would fall. Frontier outposts quickly came under pressure. Smaller garrisons found themselves isolated before reinforcements could arrive. The Mongols avoided unnecessary delays. Rather than becoming trapped before every fortress, they bypassed many strong points, disrupted communications, and attacked supply routes. The objective extended beyond capturing territory. They intended to undermine the kingdom's ability to organize an effective defense. One early engagement demonstrated how thoroughly Genghis Khan had adapted traditional steppe tactics. Instead of launching a straightforward assault against prepared defenders, Mongol cavalry repeatedly approached enemy positions before appearing to retreat. Confident that the attackers had broken, Tangut forces pursued. Only then did the Mongols suddenly reverse direction. Hidden units emerged from concealed positions. The pursuing troops found themselves surrounded. What looked like disorder had actually been carefully planned deception. The tactic would become famous throughout later Mongol campaigns. Again and again, enemies underestimated the discipline required to perform a convincing feigned retreat. Many armies believed they were chasing a defeated opponent. Instead, they rode directly into carefully prepared traps. As the campaign continued, city after city faced growing pressure. Some resisted. Others surrendered before lengthy sieges became necessary. News of Mongol victories spread rapidly across the region. Fear often traveled faster than the army itself. Psychological warfare became an important element of Mongol strategy. Communities that submitted peacefully frequently received relatively moderate treatment. Those that resisted and forced prolonged fighting risked severe punishment. The policy served a practical purpose. If one city surrendered after hearing what had happened elsewhere, the Mongols conserved both time and manpower. Among the major objectives stood the Tangut capital, Zhongxing. The city represented far more than an administrative center. It symbolized the authority of the kingdom itself. Capturing it would demonstrate that even heavily fortified capitals were vulnerable. Approaching Zhongxing, however, confronted the Mongols with challenges unlike anything they had previously faced. Its defensive walls towered above the surrounding landscape. Moats protected key sections. Supplies had been gathered in preparation for siege. The defenders believed their fortifications could outlast any nomadic army. Genghis Khan refused to allow unfamiliar circumstances to dictate the outcome. Instead, he expanded the role of specialists within his army. Chinese engineers captured during earlier operations proved invaluable. They possessed knowledge developed over centuries of siege warfare. They understood catapults. They understood battering rams. They understood methods for weakening walls through tunneling and sustained bombardment. Rather than dismissing foreign expertise, Genghis Khan incorporated it enthusiastically. This openness became one of the greatest strengths of the Mongol Empire. Every successful campaign added not only territory, but also knowledge. Engineers joined the army. Craftsmen entered imperial service. Administrators introduced new methods of record-keeping. The empire grew stronger by absorbing useful skills from every region it conquered. Outside Zhongxing, siege engines gradually took shape. Massive wooden frames rose across the landscape. Stone projectiles began crashing against defensive walls. Fire weapons created panic within sections of the city. Day after day, pressure increased. Yet the defenders refused to surrender. Months passed. Food supplies dwindled. Disease threatened crowded populations trapped behind walls. Still, the city endured. Recognizing that conventional methods alone might require excessive time, Genghis Khan experimented with another strategy. Nearby waterways were diverted in an effort to flood the city. The engineering project reflected remarkable ambition. Although it failed to produce complete success, the attempt demonstrated the Mongols' growing willingness to manipulate the environment itself during military operations. Eventually, the Tangut leadership concluded that continued resistance offered little hope. Negotiations began. The Western Xia ruler accepted vassal status. Tribute flowed northward. Gold, silver, silk, livestock, camels, other valuable goods. The kingdom also agreed to support future Mongol campaigns. For Genghis Khan, the outcome represented more than material wealth. It validated his broader strategy. The Mongols had successfully defeated a sophisticated sedentary state. They had proven capable of siege warfare. They had demonstrated adaptability. Perhaps most importantly, neighboring powers now understood that the newly unified Mongol nation could no longer be dismissed as merely another steppe confederation. The campaign produced important changes within the Mongol army itself. Commanders gained experience operating against fortified cities. Engineers became permanent members of military expeditions. Supply systems improved. Intelligence gathering expanded. The army that emerged from Western Xia looked different from the force that had once united the steppe. It remained centered upon cavalry, but it had evolved into a far more versatile instrument of conquest. Several commanders particularly distinguished themselves during these operations. Subutai continued demonstrating extraordinary strategic insight. His ability to coordinate movements across vast distances impressed both allies and rivals. Jib repeatedly displayed bold initiative. Other officers learned to combine independent judgment with strict discipline. Genghis Khan encouraged such qualities because he knew future campaigns would unfold across landscapes far more complex than the open grasslands of Mongolia. The wealth obtained from Western Xia also strengthened internal unity. Spoils were distributed among soldiers according to established principles. Successful commanders received recognition. Ordinary warriors shared in victory. This consistent distribution reinforced confidence that service under the Great Khan brought tangible rewards. Many neighboring tribes observed these developments carefully. Some voluntarily sought alliance. Others quietly prepared defenses. Farther south, however, another great power watched events with increasing concern. The Jin dynasty had ruled northern China for generations. Its emperors governed millions of subjects. Its bureaucracy managed enormous agricultural wealth. Its cities ranked among the largest on earth. Compared with the fragmented tribes once occupying the Mongolian steppe, the Jin possessed overwhelming resources. Yet they also carried a long history with the peoples of the north. For decades, they had intervened in steppe politics. They had supported one tribe against another. They had encouraged divisions whenever possible. Many Mongols remembered these policies with resentment. Genghis Khan remembered them especially well. The Tatars, longtime enemies responsible for poisoning his father, had often benefited from Jin support. The humiliation of Mongol leaders before the Jin court remained fresh in collective memory. Now circumstances had changed. The divided tribes no longer stood separately before a powerful empire. They stood together. Genghis Khan recognized that conflict with the Jin would likely become unavoidable. The question centered upon timing. He spent several years strengthening internal organization before committing to full invasion. Military reforms continued. The decimal command structure became firmly established throughout the army. Every level possessed designated officers. Every unit understood its place. Communication methods improved steadily. Messengers rode between formations with remarkable efficiency. Signals coordinated movements across enormous distances. The system allowed independent columns to operate simultaneously while remaining part of a single strategic plan. Genghis Khan also refined intelligence gathering. Scouts traveled far ahead of advancing armies. They observed roads. They counted enemy forces. They studied rivers, mountain passes, and possible campsites. Information became one of the empire's greatest weapons. Many opponents enter battle knowing very little about Mongol intentions. The Mongols often possessed detailed knowledge of enemy positions before the fighting even began. Diplomacy accompanied military preparation. Some neighboring peoples accepted Mongol authority voluntarily. Others entered temporary alliances. Merchants continued traveling between regions. Envoys exchanged messages with foreign courts. Genghis Khan preferred practical relationships. If peaceful submission achieved his objectives, warfare became unnecessary. If diplomacy failed, however, military action followed swiftly. By 1211, preparations had reached completion. The Great Khan gathered a powerful army drawn from numerous Mongol tribes and allied peoples. Thousands of horsemen assembled beneath banners that only a generation earlier would never have ridden together. Veterans who had fought during the unification campaigns now prepared for an entirely different challenge. Ahead of them lay one of the wealthiest empires in Asia. The Jin dynasty controlled fortified cities, large infantry armies, experienced generals, complex defensive systems. Many observers assumed that no nomadic force, regardless of determination, could defeat such a state. History would soon prove otherwise. Standing before his assembled commanders, Genghis Khan understood that the coming campaign would determine far more than control of frontier territory. Victory would establish the Mongols as a major imperial power. Defeat could undo decades of careful work. The future of his empire now depended upon whether the methods forged on the grasslands could overcome one of the greatest civilizations of the medieval world. The riders turned south. Behind them stretched the unified steppe. Ahead of them rose the walls of northern China. The next stage of world history was about to begin. The invasion of the Jin dynasty was unlike anything the Mongols had attempted before. Until this point, Genghis Khan had united tribes, defeated rival confederations, and forced neighboring kingdoms into submission. Now he faced one of the strongest states in Asia. The Jin dynasty ruled enormous territories across northern China. Its population numbered in the tens of millions. Its government managed sophisticated taxation systems, granaries, canals, workshops, and fortified cities connected by roads that had developed over centuries. Its armies included cavalry, infantry, engineers, and experienced commanders familiar with defending settled lands. On paper, the balance of power appeared overwhelmingly in the Jin dynasty's favor. The Mongols possessed extraordinary mobility. The Jin possessed extraordinary resources. Many observers believed that even if the Mongols won battles along the frontier, they would eventually become exhausted trying to conquer such a vast empire. Genghis Khan had no intention of fighting the war according to his enemies' expectations. Rather than concentrating all of his forces into one slow-moving army, he divided them into multiple coordinated columns. Each advanced independently. Each threatened different regions. Each forced the Jin commanders to make difficult choices. Should they defend one city while risking another? Should they pursue one Mongol army while another swept behind them? Every decision carried danger. This flexibility became one of the defining characteristics of Mongol warfare. Their armies moved with astonishing speed. Every warrior maintained several horses, changing mounts throughout the campaign to preserve endurance. While many armies of the medieval world struggled to travel long distances, Mongol cavalry could cover extraordinary ground in remarkably short periods. Speed itself became a weapon. The invasion began in earnest during 1211. The Mongols crossed through mountain passes and sections of the Great Wall that had once served as barriers against nomadic attacks. It is important to understand that the Great Wall during this period was not one continuous stone structure stretching across China. Instead, it consisted of multiple defensive systems built and rebuilt by different dynasties over centuries. Some sections were heavily fortified. Others had fallen into disrepair. The Mongols exploited weak points with careful planning and local intelligence. Once through the frontier defenses, they moved rapidly across the northern borderlands. Instead of rushing directly toward the capital, Genghis Khan focused on dismantling the Jin defensive network. Supply depots were attacked. Communication routes were disrupted. Smaller fortresses found themselves isolated. Local commanders often received conflicting reports as Mongol detachments appeared across wide areas almost simultaneously. The psychological effect proved enormous. Rumors spread faster than official orders. Some exaggerated Mongol numbers. Others claimed entire provinces had already fallen. Fear became almost as destructive as military action. One of the earliest major engagements demonstrated the growing maturity of the Mongol command system. Jin forces attempted to assemble a large army capable of confronting the invaders directly. Genghis Khan refused to fight where the enemy wished. His cavalry harassed the advancing force. They attacked supply wagons. They struck isolated detachments. They disappeared before larger formations could respond. The objective was not immediate destruction. It was exhaustion. Hungry soldiers marched more slowly. Confused commanders made poor decisions. Eventually, the Jin army found itself weakened before the decisive battle had even begun. When the main confrontation finally came, the Mongols struck with overwhelming coordination. Horse archers advanced in waves. Arrows darkened the sky. Units rotated continuously so that fresh warriors replaced those whose quivers had emptied. If enemy cavalry attempted pursuit, the Mongols retreated deliberately. If infantry broke formation, mounted units swept around the flanks. Every movement appeared carefully rehearsed. What many opponents interpreted as spontaneous improvisation often reflected years of training. Victories accumulated. Each success opened new opportunities. Cities that had once believed themselves secure now questioned whether resistance remained worthwhile. Some surrendered before formal sieges even began. Others chose to fight. Those decisions often determined their fate. The city of Datong became one of the important objectives during the early phase of the campaign. Protected by substantial walls and experienced defenders, it represented another opportunity for the Mongols to refine siege warfare. Genghis Khan no longer relied solely upon cavalry. Engineers accompanied the army. Siege machines traveled with the advancing columns or constructed on site using local materials. Chinese specialists captured during earlier campaigns now worked beside Mongol commanders. Knowledge crossed cultural boundaries. Military innovation accelerated. After sustained operations, Datong fell. The victory carried importance beyond its immediate strategic value. It demonstrated once again the Mongols had adapted. They had become capable of combining mobility with engineering. Soon afterward, attention shifted toward one of the greatest prizes in northern China, the Jin capital, known during this period as Zhongdu. Located near the site of modern Beijing, Zhongdu ranked among the most important cities in East Asia. Its walls enclosed palaces, government offices, workshops, temples, markets, and densely populated neighborhoods. Thousands of officials administered the empire from within its defenses. Its fall would shake the entire political order. Genghis Khan understood that a direct assault against such a city could prove disastrously expensive. Instead, he embraced patience. The Mongols surrounded Zhongdu. Roads leading into the city came under their control. Food shipments were intercepted. Communication with surrounding provinces became increasingly difficult. Rather than defeating the defenders through one overwhelming attack, they intended to wear them down. Month after month, the siege continued. Inside the city, conditions steadily worsened. Food prices rose dramatically. Supplies dwindled. Disease spread among crowded populations. Desperation became increasingly visible. Outside the walls, Mongol engineers expanded siege works. Catapults hurled massive stones. Incendiary projectiles ignited buildings. Defensive towers suffered repeated bombardment. The Mongols also benefited from the knowledge of Muslim and Chinese engineers, whose expertise greatly expanded the effectiveness of siege operations. This cooperation reflected one of Genghis Khan's greatest practical strengths. He rarely rejected useful ideas simply because they originated elsewhere. Every conquest became an opportunity to strengthen the empire itself. The Jin court recognized the seriousness of the situation. Negotiations began. Representatives offered tribute: silk, gold, silver, other valuable goods. For a time, an agreement temporarily eased immediate pressure. Genghis Khan accepted substantial payments. His army withdrew from the capital's immediate vicinity. Some later observers misunderstood this decision as hesitation. It reflected calculation. The campaign was far from finished. The Jin dynasty still possessed significant military strength. The Mongols preferred to continue the struggle under favorable conditions rather than exhaust themselves unnecessarily before one city. The peace proved temporary. Soon afterward, the Jin leadership relocated its capital farther south to Kaifeng. The decision carried enormous symbolic consequences. Many interpreted the move as acknowledgement that northern territories could no longer be defended effectively. To Genghis Khan, it also suggested that previous agreements no longer held the same value. Military operations resumed. The Mongols returned. This time, the outcome proved final. Zhongdu eventually fell after prolonged pressure. Historical sources describe widespread destruction following the capture of the city. Buildings burned. Government institutions collapsed. Large portions of the population suffered terribly. As with many medieval conquests, exact casualty figures remain impossible to establish. Contemporary chroniclers often exaggerated numbers for dramatic effect. Modern historians generally approach such claims with caution. What remains beyond serious dispute is that the fall of Zhongdu represented one of the defining moments of the campaign. The Jin dynasty lost its northern capital. Its prestige suffered an immense blow. The psychological consequences reached far beyond the battlefield. Throughout northern China, officials, generals, merchants, and ordinary citizens realized that the political landscape had fundamentally changed. For generations, the Jin dynasty had appeared secure. Now its vulnerability stood exposed. Yet Genghis Khan did not seek indiscriminate destruction everywhere he went. This distinction often disappears beneath later legends. Cities that resisted fiercely sometimes endured catastrophic consequences. Communities that surrendered peacefully often experienced very different treatment. The Mongols increasingly understood the value of preserving skilled populations. Artisans became especially important. Metal workers, carpenters, stonemasons, engineers, textile specialists, administrative clerks. Rather than eliminating such expertise, Mongol authorities frequently relocated these individuals to serve elsewhere within the growing empire. This policy strengthened future campaigns. Each conquest expanded the empire's technical capabilities. The same pattern emerged with administrators. Chinese officials familiar with taxation, agriculture, and record-keeping entered Mongol service. Their knowledge helped transform what had once been a tribal confederation into an increasingly sophisticated imperial state. Genghis Khan recognized that governing millions of settled subjects required different methods than leading nomadic clans across the grasslands. He proved remarkably willing to adapt. One advisor who gained influence during this period was Yelu Chukai. A Khitan scholar and administrator, Yelu Chukai urged policies emphasizing taxation over unnecessary destruction. His argument was practical. A living population paying taxes generated long-term wealth. An empty province produced little. Although military necessity continued to shape Mongol decisions, advisors like Yelu Chukai gradually influenced broader administrative thinking. The empire increasingly balanced conquest with governance. Meanwhile, Mongol commanders continued refining battlefield methods. Communication became even more sophisticated. Mounted messengers carried orders rapidly between separate armies. Scouts ranged far ahead. False withdrawals repeatedly deceived opponents. Intelligence networks expanded. Captured prisoners provided information. Local guides revealed roads, rivers, and mountain passes. The Mongols rarely advanced blindly. Preparation preceded movement. Subutai emerged as one of the central figures in these campaigns. His strategic thinking impressed Genghis Khan repeatedly. Rather than focusing only upon immediate battles, Subutai considered entire theaters of war. He studied geography. He anticipated enemy responses. He coordinated multiple forces across extraordinary distances. Later generations would regard him as one of history's greatest military minds. Jib also continued earning distinction. Bold, aggressive, capable of independent command. He often undertook difficult missions requiring speed and initiative. The partnership between Subutai and Jib would later produce some of the most remarkable campaigns of the medieval era. As years passed, the Jin dynasty steadily lost territory. Some local commanders surrendered voluntarily. Others resisted until defeat became inevitable. Political divisions within the dynasty complicated every attempt at organized defense. Different officials disagreed over strategy. Resources became strained. Confidence eroded. The Mongols exploited every weakness. Yet despite remarkable success, Genghis Khan understood that complete conquest of northern China would require more time than remained immediately available. Events farther west soon demanded his attention. Beyond the mountains and deserts of Central Asia lay another wealthy empire. Unlike the Jin, this state initially sought peaceful commercial relations. Its ruler possessed no long history of conflict with the Mongols. Trade, rather than war, appeared the natural foundation for future interaction. Genghis Khan welcomed that possibility. He understood the importance of commerce. Silk Road caravans connected civilizations across Eurasia. Peaceful exchange benefited everyone. Merchants carried not only goods, but also knowledge, technologies, religious ideas, and diplomatic opportunities. The Great Khan, therefore, made a decision that reflected another side of his leadership. Instead of sending an army westward, he sent merchants, loaded with valuable trade goods and official documents guaranteeing their status as representatives of the Mongol Empire. A caravan began the long journey toward the Khwarazmian Empire. Had those merchants returned safely, history might have followed a very different path. Instead, what happened to them would ignite one of the most devastating campaigns of the medieval world. A single decision made far beyond Mongolia would transform diplomatic tension into total war, and the consequences would echo across Central Asia for generations. By the second decade of the 13th century, Genghis Khan had achieved what few rulers in history ever managed. He had united a fractured homeland. He had humbled powerful rivals. He had forced neighboring kingdoms to acknowledge the growing strength of the Mongol state. Yet despite his reputation as a conqueror, not every challenge was met first with war. Like many rulers of his era, Genghis Khan understood that stable trade could produce wealth more efficiently than constant campaigning. The Silk Road had connected east and west for centuries. Across its routes moved silk from China, glassware from the Middle East, precious metals, fine textiles, spices, medicines, paper, ideas, religious teachings, scientific knowledge. Every major civilization along those roads depended, in one way or another, upon long-distance commerce. The Mongol Empire occupied an increasingly important position along those networks. If trade flourished, the empire would benefit. If trade collapsed, everyone would lose. West of the Mongol frontier stood the Khwarazmian Empire. At its greatest extent, it stretched across much of present-day Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Iran, and neighboring regions. Its cities ranked among the richest in the Islamic world. Samarkand dazzled travelers with its markets and architecture. Bokhara stood as a celebrated center of scholarship and commerce. Urgench prospered through trade flowing across Central Asia. The empire itself had risen rapidly during the late 12th and early 13th centuries. Its ruler, Shah Muhammad II, governed an enormous territory. Yet his authority rested upon a fragile political foundation. The empire expanded quickly. Provincial governors held significant power. Relations within the ruling family were often tense. His mother, Turkin Khatun, exercised considerable influence over state affairs. Core politics remained complicated. Although outwardly impressive, the empire contained internal weaknesses that were not immediately obvious. Genghis Khan initially sought cooperation rather than conflict. Historical sources indicate that he sent messages emphasizing peaceful relations and mutual commercial benefit. He addressed the Khwarazmian ruler respectfully. Trade, not conquest, formed the basis of his proposal. To demonstrate goodwill, he dispatched a large caravan. The merchants carried valuable goods: silks, furs, silver, other luxury items. Official documents identified them as representatives acting under Mongol protection. The caravan eventually reached the frontier city of Ochur, located along one of Central Asia's major trade routes. Ochur occupied a strategic position between the two empires. Its governor was a man known in many historical sources as an Alchuk, sometimes also called Genghis Khan. Suspicious by nature and perhaps influenced by political calculations, the governor viewed the arrival of the wealthy caravan with deep distrust. He accused the merchants of espionage. Whether he genuinely believed the accusation or simply wished to seize their valuable cargo remains impossible to determine with certainty. The historical record presents differing perspectives. What appears consistent is the outcome. The merchants were arrested. Their goods were confiscated. Many were executed. News eventually reached Genghis Khan. His reaction demonstrated remarkable restraint. Rather than immediately declaring war, he pursued diplomacy once again. He understood that provincial officials sometimes acted independently. Perhaps the governor had exceeded his authority. Perhaps the Shah himself would correct the injustice. To test that possibility, Genghis Khan sent a delegation of ambassadors directly to Shah Muhammad. Their mission was straightforward. They requested punishment for the governor of Ochur. They demanded compensation for the murdered merchants. They sought restoration of peaceful relations, according to long-established customs recognized across much of Eurasia. Envoys occupied a protected status. Even hostile rulers generally respected diplomatic immunity. Killing ambassadors carried enormous consequences. The Khwarazmian court now faced a choice. It could punish the governor, it could negotiate, or it could escalate the crisis. Shah Muhammad chose the most dangerous path. Accounts differ slightly regarding the precise sequence of events. Most agree that one Mongol ambassador was executed. The others were humiliated. Their beards were reportedly shaved before they were sent back east. In many cultures of the medieval world, such treatment represented a profound insult. For the Mongols, the violation of diplomatic norms carried exceptional significance. Genghis Khan interpreted the act not merely as an offense against himself, but as an attack upon the principles governing relations between states. Peace had been offered. Trade had been proposed. Envoys had requested justice. The response had been murder. Diplomacy had failed. War became inevitable. The decision that followed ranks among the most consequential in medieval history. Rather than launching a limited punitive raid, Genghis Khan prepared for a full-scale invasion. His objective extended beyond revenge. He intended to destroy the political power responsible for the insult. Preparations reflected extraordinary planning. Supplies were gathered. Scouts mapped routes across deserts and mountain passes. Intelligence networks collected information about cities, fortifications, and enemy forces. The army itself was divided into several independently operating columns. Each possessed clear objectives. Each could maneuver rapidly. Each remained capable of supporting the others when necessary. Historians continued debating the precise size of the Mongol army. Medieval chroniclers frequently claimed enormous numbers. Modern scholarship generally favors more conservative estimates. Regardless of exact figures, the force represented one of the most disciplined military organizations of its age. The campaign began in 1219. The first major objective remained Ochur. The city where the crisis had started would become the opening battlefield. The governor responsible for arresting the caravan was captured alive. Several medieval sources describe his execution in dramatic terms. including the story that molten silver was poured into his eyes and ears. The account has become one of the most famous episodes associated with the campaign. Modern historians approach the story cautiously. It appears in later chronicles and may contain symbolic elements emphasizing poetic justice rather than literal fact. Whether entirely accurate or embellished over time, the broader historical reality remains clear. The governor was executed. Otrar was devastated. The first warning had been delivered. Yet Otrar represented only the beginning. The Khwarazmian Empire stretched across immense distances. Its rulers still possessed numerous cities, large armies, significant resources. Many observers expected prolonged resistance. Instead, the empire began collapsing with astonishing speed. Genghis Khan's strategy relied upon surprise. Rather than advancing along one predictable route, Mongol armies appeared from multiple directions simultaneously. Enemy commanders struggled to determine where the main attack would occur. Cities found themselves isolated before neighboring provinces could organize assistance. Communication within the Khwarazmian Empire rapidly deteriorated. Confusion spread. Some governors awaited orders that never arrived. Others acted independently. Coordination became increasingly difficult. The Shah himself made decisions that historians have debated ever since. Rather than concentrating his armies into one massive force capable of confronting the Mongols directly, he dispersed troops among numerous fortified cities. Perhaps he believed strong walls would exhaust the invaders. Perhaps he feared placing too much authority in the hands of individual generals. Whatever his reasoning, the result favored the Mongols. Instead of facing one united enemy, they defeated isolated defenders one after another. One of the first great prizes was Bokhara. Few cities in Central Asia possessed greater prestige. Its mosques, its libraries, its scholars, its merchants, all reflected centuries of prosperity. When Mongol forces approached, portions of the defending army withdrew into the citadel. Other elements abandoned the city altogether. After resistance collapsed, Genghis Khan entered Bokhara. A famous story preserved by Persian chronicler Adam al-Javani describes him addressing the city's inhabitants inside the main mosque. According to the account, he declared that he was the punishment of God sent because of their sins. Whether the speech occurred exactly as later recorded remains impossible to verify. Medieval chroniclers often shaped such narratives for literary and moral purposes. What can be said with confidence is that the conquest of Bokhara profoundly affected contemporaries. The city fell. Its military resistance ended. Its wealth passed into Mongol hands. The psychological impact spread throughout the Islamic world. If Bokhara could be conquered, few places appeared truly secure. After Bokhara, the Mongols advanced toward Samarkand. If Bokhara represented one jewel of Central Asia, Samarkand represented another. Its walls were formidable. Its population was large. Its ruler had assembled substantial defensive forces. Among them were war elephants acquired through earlier campaigns farther south. To many defenders, the city seemed capable of withstanding siege. Genghis Khan approached the challenge systematically. His engineers established siege positions. His cavalry isolated the surrounding countryside. No relief force could easily reach the city. The defenders launched sorties. The Mongols responded with carefully coordinated counterattacks. Some enemy troops surrendered. Others continued resisting. Gradually, morale deteriorated. When sections of a city's defenders abandoned their positions or changed sides, the outcome became inevitable. Samarkand fell. As in earlier conquests, treatment varied according to category. Many soldiers were executed. Skilled artisans and engineers often received different treatment. Rather than killing them, Mongol authorities selected many for relocation. Craftsmen capable of producing weapons, building siege equipment, creating luxury goods, all represented valuable resources. They were transported eastward to serve the expanding empire. This pattern reflected an important aspect of Mongol policy. Conquest aimed not only to eliminate resistance, but also to strengthen future campaigns. Knowledge itself became part of the spoils of war. Meanwhile, Shah Muhammad found himself facing catastrophe. City after city reported defeat. Provincial commanders lost contact with one another. The empire he had spent years expanding began disintegrating in a matter of months. Instead of organizing one final defensive stand, the Shah retreated. He moved westward across his shrinking domains. The Mongols pursued relentlessly. Detachments under trusted commanders followed every reported movement. Eventually, Shah Muhammad fled toward islands in the Caspian Sea. There, isolated and stripped of effective power, he died in late 1220 or early 1221. His death marked the collapse of centralized Khwarazmian resistance. Yet the war itself was far from over. One determined figure still refused to surrender: Jalal al-Din, the Shah's son. Unlike his father, Jalal al-Din attempted to rally surviving forces. He gathered loyal soldiers. He sought to preserve what remained of the empire. His resistance would earn the respect of friend and enemy alike. For Genghis Khan, however, the destruction of the Khwarazmian state remained unfinished. The pursuit would continue across mountains, rivers, and deserts. And before long, two of his greatest generals would embark upon a journey that would carry Mongol horsemen farther west than they had ever ridden before, revealing an entirely new world waiting beyond the horizon. With the death of Shah Muhammad, the Khwarazmian Empire had lost its ruler, but it had not yet ceased to resist. His son, Jalal al-Din Mangburni, refused to accept defeat. Unlike his father, Jalal al-Din proved to be an energetic and capable commander. He gathered surviving soldiers. He rallied loyal supporters. He attempted to rebuild an army from the scattered remnants of a collapsing empire. For a brief moment, it appeared that organized resistance might continue. Genghis Khan respected determination, even in an enemy. He ordered his generals to continue the pursuit. The campaign carried Mongol forces across landscapes few of them had ever imagined. Mountain passes, dry plateaus, river valleys, ancient cities that had stood for centuries. The speed of the advance astonished contemporaries. One after another, regions that had once answered to the Khwarazmian court fell under Mongol control. Jalal al-Din fought several engagements while withdrawing toward the southeast. His final major confrontation with Genghis Khan occurred near the Indus River in 1221. Cornered against the water, Jalal al-Din refused surrender. His army fought with determination despite overwhelming odds. Eventually, the battle turned against him. According to several medieval sources, Jalal al-Din escaped by riding his horse down a steep bank and plunging into the river before swimming to safety. Whether every detail unfolded exactly as later chroniclers described remains uncertain. The broader event is well established. He escaped. His army did not. One tradition records that Genghis Khan watched the dramatic escape and remarked that a father should be proud to have such a son. The statement cannot be confirmed with certainty. Like many famous quotations from medieval history, it may have been shaped by later writers. Yet the story reflects an important reality. Genghis Khan admired courage, even when displayed by an opponent. With the organized resistance of the Khwarazmian Empire broken, the Mongol Empire reached farther west than ever before. Its borders now stretched across enormous portions of Asia. Yet Genghis Khan did not simply remain in Central Asia consolidating his gains. Instead, he entrusted one of the most remarkable military expeditions of the medieval era to two extraordinary commanders, Subutai and Jeep. Their mission began as a pursuit of fleeing enemies. It quickly evolved into something much larger. Rather than immediately returning east, the two generals pushed farther into unfamiliar lands. They crossed the Caucasus Mountains. They encountered new kingdoms, new peoples, new military traditions. The expedition functioned as both campaign and reconnaissance. Subutai believed that knowledge could become as valuable as victory. Every river was mapped, every mountain pass noted, every political rivalry observed. The Mongols gathered intelligence wherever they traveled. That information would later prove invaluable. The campaign brought them into contact with the Alans, the Georgians, and the Cumans. Rather than attacking every opponent at once, the Mongols relied on diplomacy as readily as deception. They persuaded one group to abandon another. They exploited existing rivalries. They isolated enemies before destroying them individually. It was a pattern that had served Genghis Khan repeatedly throughout his rise. The Mongols preferred divided enemies. Eventually, the Cumans sought assistance from the princes of Kievan Rus. A coalition formed. Several Rus princes joined Cuman forces to confront the advancing Mongols. The armies met in 1223 at the Battle of the Khalkha River. Once again, the Mongols demonstrated the tactical methods that had made them so formidable. They retreated deliberately. The coalition believed victory was within reach. For days they pursued. The pursuing armies gradually lost cohesion. Units became separated. Supply lines stretched. Communication weakened. Then the Mongols turned. The counterattack shattered the coalition. The defeat proved devastating. Several princes were killed. Others were captured. The Mongols had demonstrated that their methods remained effective even against unfamiliar opponents thousands of kilometers from Mongolia. Yet despite the victory, they did not remain. Their mission had never been permanent conquest. Instead, they returned east carrying something perhaps even more valuable than territory: knowledge. They now understood the geography of the Western steppe. They knew the political divisions among the Rus principalities. They had observed the military practices of Eastern Europe. A generation later, those observations would help guide one of the greatest invasions in European history. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan himself turned his attention back toward Mongolia. Years of campaigning had transformed both the empire and its ruler. The young orphan abandoned after his father's death had become master of an empire stretching across much of Eurasia. But even the greatest conqueror could not escape time. By the early 1220s, questions about succession became increasingly important. Unlike many rulers, Genghis Khan understood the danger of leaving such matters unresolved. His empire united peoples of different languages, cultures, and traditions. Without a clear succession plan, everything might collapse in a civil war. He therefore considered carefully which of his sons should inherit supreme authority. His eldest son, Joki, had become an accomplished commander. Yet doubts surrounding his birth continued, creating tension within the imperial family. His brother Chagatai openly questioned his legitimacy. The disagreement threatened unity. Talyui, the youngest son, enjoyed his father's confidence and had demonstrated considerable military ability. Ogdi, however, possessed qualities that made him particularly suitable as compromise candidate. He was respected. He maintained good relationships with his brothers. He displayed administrative skill alongside military experience. After consultation with family members and senior commanders, Genghis Khan indicated that Ogdi should succeed him as Great Khan. The decision did not eliminate every future dispute. It did, however, provide a framework that helped preserve stability after his death. While these questions occupied the imperial court, another issue demanded Genghis Khan's attention. The kingdom of Western Xia. Years earlier, the Tangut state had submitted to Mongol authority. It had accepted vassal status. It had promised military support. During later campaigns, however, the Tangut rulers failed to provide the assistance expected of loyal subjects. To Genghis Khan, this represented more than political disagreement. It was betrayal. He decided that Western Xia would face one final campaign. The invasion began in 1226. Unlike earlier expeditions, this campaign carried extraordinary severity. City after city fell. Resistance met harsh consequences. The Mongols destroyed fortifications. Fields were devastated. Settlements that refused submission often suffered catastrophic destruction. The objective extended beyond conquest. Genghis Khan intended to ensure that no future ruler would doubt the consequences of violating agreements with the Mongol Empire. As the campaign progressed, the aging conqueror's health declined. Exactly what happened remains uncertain. Different historical traditions offer different explanations. Some suggest he suffered injuries after falling from a horse during a hunt. Others attribute his decline to illness. Still others simply point to age and the cumulative strain of decades spent campaigning. The historical evidence does not allow a definitive conclusion. What is clear is that by 1227, Genghis Khan knew his life was nearing its end. Even then, he remained focused upon completing the campaign. He instructed his commanders to continue operations without interruption. The siege of the Tangut capital continued. Negotiations were rejected. The kingdom that had once survived through submission would not survive a second betrayal. In August 1227, somewhere during this final campaign, Genghis Khan died. He was approximately 65 years old, although the exact age depends upon the uncertain date of his birth. His death was kept secret. The Mongol leadership feared that news of the Great Khan's passing might encourage resistance among enemies or uncertainty within their own ranks. Military operations therefore continued. The Tangut capital eventually fell. Western Xia disappeared from the political map. Its territory became part of the expanding Mongol Empire. Meanwhile, preparations began for one of history's most mysterious funerals. According to Mongol tradition, Genghis Khan's burial place would remain secret. His body was carried back toward the homeland. Numerous legends later surrounded the journey. Some claimed that anyone encountered by the funeral procession was killed to preserve secrecy. Others suggested that soldiers later concealed the burial site so completely that even they did not survive to reveal its location. These stories cannot be confirmed. They belong partly to legend. What remains true is that the location of Genghis Khan's tomb has never been established with certainty. Despite extensive archaeological research and historical investigation, his final resting place remains unknown. The mystery has endured for nearly 8 centuries. After his death, the succession proceeded largely as he had intended. A great Kurultai eventually confirmed Ogdi as Great Khan. The transition proved remarkably stable considering the scale of the empire. Rather than collapsing, the Mongol state entered another period of expansion. Under Ogdi, campaigns against the Jin dynasty continued. By 1234, the Jin dynasty had fallen. Northern China came under Mongol control. Elsewhere, Bada Khan and Subutai launched the Great Western Invasion. Mongol armies conquered much of the Rus. They defeated Hungarian forces at Mohi in 1241. They defeated a European coalition at Legnica. Only Ogdi's death that same year required many princes to return east, bringing the campaign into Central Europe to an end. Later generations of Genghis Khan's descendants continued reshaping the world. Hulagu conquered much of the Middle East and captured Baghdad in 1258, ending the Abbasid Caliphate. Kublai Khan completed the conquest of southern China and established the Yuan dynasty. The Mongol Empire eventually stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. No contiguous land empire before or since has equaled its size. Over time, however, governing such enormous distances became increasingly difficult. The descendants of Genghis Khan ruled separate regions. The Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, the Golden Horde across the Western steppe and parts of Eastern Europe. Although all traced their legitimacy to Genghis Khan, they gradually developed independent political interests. The unified empire slowly evolved into several distinct states. Yet even after political unity faded, many of the systems created during Genghis Khan's lifetime endured. The relay network, known as the Yam, connected distant regions with remarkable efficiency. Merchants traveled under official protection. Trade expanded across Eurasia. Historians often refer to this period as the Pax Mongolica, not because warfare disappeared. It certainly did not. But because much of the vast territory under Mongol influence enjoyed levels of long-distance security that encouraged commerce, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. Ideas moved alongside goods. Chinese inventions reached Western Asia and Europe. Persian astronomy influenced scholars farther east. Medical knowledge traveled across continents. Religious leaders journeyed through lands that had once been divided by constant warfare. Christian missionaries visited Mongol courts. Muslim merchants expanded their networks. Buddhist monks traveled between regions under imperial protection. The Mongols generally practiced a policy of religious tolerance. Rather than demanding conversion, they usually expected loyalty and taxation. This approach allowed diverse faiths to coexist across much of the empire. At the same time, no balanced assessment of Genghis Khan can ignore the immense suffering associated with his conquests. Entire cities were destroyed. Civilian populations often endured famine, displacement, or massacre. Agricultural systems in some regions suffered lasting damage. Many contemporary chroniclers described scenes of extraordinary devastation. Modern historians continue debating the scale of casualties. partly because medieval sources frequently exaggerated numbers. Even allowing for exaggeration, the human cost of the Mongol conquests was immense. His legacy, therefore, remains deeply complex. In Mongolia, Genghis Khan is remembered as the founder of the nation. His image appears on monuments, currency, public institutions, and national celebrations. He symbolizes unity, resilience, and independence. In other parts of the world, memories differ. Some remember him primarily as a conqueror. Others emphasize his role in connecting Eurasia. Still others study his administrative innovations, military reforms, or legal traditions. Modern scholarship has increasingly moved beyond simple labels. Rather than portraying Genghis Khan only as hero or villain, historians examine the broader historical context. They explore how he transformed political organization, how he promoted individuals based on ability rather than birth, how he incorporated administrators, engineers, merchants, and scholars from many different cultures, how he built institutions capable of surviving beyond his own lifetime. They also continue examining the darker consequences of expansion through war. His story cannot be separated from either achievement or destruction. Both formed essential parts of the world he created. Even modern science has added another dimension to his legacy. Genetic research published during the early 21st century identified a remarkably widespread Y-chromosome lineage across large parts of Asia. While no genetic study can identify Genghis Khan himself with certainty, researchers concluded that the lineage most likely originated from a powerful ruling family in Mongolia during his era. The extraordinary social status enjoyed by his descendants allowed that lineage to spread across generations. The finding became one more reminder of the empire's immense demographic influence. Perhaps the greatest measure of Genghis Khan's significance lies not in the territory he conquered, but in the changes he set into motion. When he was born, the Mongols were one among many competing tribes living on the edge of larger civilizations. When he died, they had become the center of the largest contiguous empire the world had ever known. He transformed a fragmented society into a disciplined state. He reshaped military strategy through mobility, intelligence, coordination, and adaptability. He forced civilizations separated by thousands of kilometers into direct contact. The consequences of those connections continued long after the empire itself fragmented. Nearly 8 centuries later, his name remains recognized across the world. His burial place is still unknown. His face survives only in later artistic interpretations rather than verified portraits. Many details of his life remain debated, yet the broad outline of his achievement is beyond dispute. A boy abandoned on the Mongolian steppe after the death of his father rose through determination, political skill, military innovation, and relentless ambition to alter the course of world history. His empire eventually disappeared. Every empire does. Its borders changed. Its ruling families declined. Its successor states rose and fell. But the world that emerged afterward was not the same as the one that had existed before his rise. Trade routes shifted. Kingdoms disappeared. New states emerged. Cultures interacted in ways that would have been difficult to imagine only a generation earlier. Whether remembered as a brilliant strategist, a ruthless conqueror, an empire builder, or a transformative historical figure, Genghis Khan remains impossible to ignore. His life stands as one of history's most extraordinary examples of how a single individual, shaped by hardship and opportunity alike, could influence the destiny of continents. And that is why, after more than 800 years, the story of Temüjin, the orphan of the Mongolian steppe who became Genghis Khan, still endures. Not as legend alone, but as one of the defining chapters in the history of humanity.